So what happens when the one person in a courtroom who's supposed to be the impartial referee is accused of, well, inventing crimes right from the bench? Today, we're diving into a fascinating case out of Florida that really puts the idea of judicial power on trial and asks a very, very tough question: who judges the judges?
Now that quote you're seeing, that's not from some movie script. Nope. That is the core accusation in a real petition filed against a sitting judge. The claim is just extraordinary, that a judge used their official position to make up criminal charges against someone who wasn't even on trial. It's an allegation that, honestly, strikes at the very heart of how we think our justice system is supposed to work.
So, you have to be wondering, how is this even possible? We're going to unpack it all. We'll start with the criminal case that kind of set the whole stage. Then we'll dig into the really specific allegations against the judge. And we'll also explore the legal shield, it's called judicial immunity, that makes holding a judge accountable such an unbelievable uphill battle. Okay, so it all kicked off in what seemed like a pretty standard situation. One courtroom, one judge, one defendant. But this case would quickly spiral into something much, much bigger, a constitutional challenge with some really far-reaching implications.
There are really three key people at the center of this whole thing. First, you've got the defendant, Kelly Lynch. It's her trial. Then there's the judge, Judge Madrigal, who's presiding over the case. And then there's Rusty Miller. And this is the twist. He's a private citizen who had nothing to do with the case, but who allegedly became the target of the judge's accusations right from the bench.
To really get how we ended up with these explosive claims, we actually have to rewind a bit and look at the original trial of Kelly Lynch, because it was during her case that the first red flags really started to pop up. If you look at the court transcripts from the plea hearing, they paint a picture of a really high-pressure environment. The judge is quoted here reminding the defendant of the absolutely staggering 80-year sentence she could be looking at if she decided to go to trial instead of taking the plea deal on the table.
And that state of mind, it became a huge point later on. The defendant claimed that under all that stress, she didn't really grasp what she was signing in the plea agreement. And that argument would eventually play a big role in challenging the whole proceeding.
All right, now things get a little technical, but stick with me because this is really important. The legal challenge also focused on this issue called duplicitous charging. Basically, the jury was given one single charge, but it had two different dollar amounts attached to it. They said no to the higher amount, but yes to the lower one. The petitioners argue that this created a legally inconsistent verdict. I mean, how can you be guilty and not guilty of the very same charge?
And look, they weren't just pulling this argument out of thin air. They pointed directly to a Florida Supreme Court precedent, a case called State versus Weaver, which says that convictions like this simply can't stand because you have no way of knowing what crime the jury actually unanimously agreed upon. But, the verdict wasn't the only problem here. The judge's own conduct was put under the microscope, with the petition alleging that his actions completely violated some of the most fundamental rules of the legal system.
And this is where we get to the real heart of the constitutional conflict. On one side, you have the allegation, a judge, a state official, making up criminal accusations without any evidence or process. And on the other side, you have the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause, which exists for the very purpose of stopping the government from acting in such an arbitrary way.
Due process. I mean, that is a bedrock principle of our entire legal system. It's the promise that there's a fair process, a rule book, that the government itself has to follow. It means you get to know what you're being accused of, and you get a real chance to defend yourself. The petition's claim is that this fundamental right was just tossed aside from the bench.
So this all begs a massive question, right? If these allegations are true, and they're this serious, why isn't there a simple way to deal with it? Well, the answer lies in this really powerful legal protection that shields judges from exactly these kinds of challenges.
Yeah, to really understand why this is such an uphill battle, we have to talk about judicial immunity. It's a legal concept that's absolutely essential for an independent judiciary, but man, it also creates a major, major hurdle for accountability.
Now, this immunity is called absolute for a reason. We want our judges to make tough calls based on the law without being scared of getting sued every time someone is unhappy with a ruling. And in theory, this protection applies even if a judge's actions are malicious or corrupt, as long as they are acting in their official capacity as a judge.
So trying to get past this immunity shield is incredibly difficult. There's really only one path, and it's a narrow one. You have to argue that what the judge did wasn't a judicial act at all, and that's the whole ballgame here.
The petition's core argument is that fabricating crimes against a citizen isn't part of a judge's job description. It was a personal act, they claim, not a protected judicial function.
So, armed with this very specific legal argument, the petitioners are trying to do something that is incredibly rare and difficult: pierce that shield of judicial immunity.
The legal tool they're using is something called a writ of mandamus. It's an extraordinary request, basically asking a higher court to step in and order a lower court official to do their job correctly. They're arguing the alleged misconduct is so severe that it's a total breakdown of the system that requires intervention from above.
And what's really interesting is that this fight has grown beyond just this one case. The petition is now pushing for broader, systemic changes, things like better training for judges, a complete review of how complaints are handled, and a lot more transparency. They're using this one incident to try and fix what they see as a much larger problem.
And all of this leaves us with that profound, thorny question at the heart of this entire conflict. Our legal system is built on the idea of independent judges, free from outside pressure. But when the actions of those very judges are called into question, who holds them accountable? It's a question that really challenges the delicate balance between judicial power and public trust.